So welcome, Eloise. Welcome to this Montessori Parenting Conference. I'm so glad that you are here to talk with us about your own journey as a parenting coach, as a mother, and also your journey as a homeschooler. Although, it's just starting to be, I think from September that's going to be the official year when Frida should have been in school. So, it's going to be very interesting to hear your thoughts about all of that. And I'm sure many people here know who you are. But for those who don't know you yet, could you please introduce yourself to start with?
So thank you so much for having me, Karine. I'm really pleased to be here. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Eloise Rickman, and I live in South London in the UK with my daughter Frida, who is 3.5, she'll be 4 in April, my husband Sam, and our cat Alfie. And as Karine was saying, we are planning on, I never know what to say if we're planning on homeschooling her. I mean, we are homeschooling her already. She's never been to a nursery or childcare or anything like that. So we're still in the early days of our home education journey, and we don't know how long it will go on for. We're just kind of going to wait and see. So that's kind of what we do at home. And then professionally, I never quite know what to call myself. I kind of call myself a writer and parent educator and parenting coach. So I work with parents over online courses and kind of one-to-one mentoring as well, looking at peaceful parenting and kind of how to create a beautiful early childhood. And I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, basically, I met you, I would say, online when you started to blog about Frida, about your little daughter, who was like probably a little toddler when you first started.
Yeah.
And then that has evolved into a professional business for you. So I would like to come back to you as a new mom. How was it for you when you became a mom? What did you know about children, and so on? What did you do to educate yourself, basically, as a first-time mum?
Read a lot of books. I was that really boring person. So we went to NCT classes. So for those of you in the UK, you'll probably have heard of them. So NCT is the National Childbirth Trust. So they do kind of classes for local parents to meet each other and prepare for childbirth. And so we went to our local NCT class, and my husband was mortified because everyone else was there kind of a bit nervous, hadn't really read much about childbirth, didn't really know what was going to happen, kind of asking questions like, how much will it hurt? And I'm there going, so, what I'd really like to cover in this course is the difference between a managed and a physiological third stage of labour and what are the benefits and cons to each. So embarrassed. But I think, so I read a lot, basically. I think that's my way of always feeling secure and that I've kind of prepared myself. And actually, I was lucky. My mother used to work also as an NCT teacher. So I feel like kind of birth and early parenthood, I had quite a good sense of. And she had my brother and sister quite a lot younger than me. So my brother is almost 7 years younger, and my sister is 9 years younger than me. So although, my daughter was our first child, I kind of had seen her raising my siblings in a slightly different way than if we had been closer in age. So I witnessed her doing things like co-sleeping with them sometimes and breastfeeding them. So I think I already had a slight sense of a kind of parenting that would come naturally to me in the early days of parenting, I suppose. But my husband and I talk about this a lot. I think it was a lucky and happy surprise to us that we both ended up sharing a lot of the same views on child rearing, because really I think we both went into it with our eyes completely blind. You kind of read about childbirth and you read about breastfeeding and changing nappies in the early days, but really it was only once she was here in my arms that I think it became real, and I started to really think about what it meant to raise a new human in this world and what it meant to kind of actually parent another human being. So it was a steep learning curve.
Yeah, I think that's the case for every parent, whatever our background. Yes. It's a learning curve. I have a background in psychology, so I was supposed to know everything, but when it's your child, it's totally different, right? And you question yourself all the time, and you become anxious, obviously. Mm. And it's a learning curve for any parents. And you recall the NCT course preparation, and it was probably more about the birth, right?
Exactly.
About the birth process and the early days. And then all of a sudden, when your child starts to grow, there is nothing available, nothing officially.
Yes.
Nobody is going to really guide you and teach you. And I think when you go and see the nurse with question about the toddlers, it's become very blurry, the kind of advice or information you can receive from, at least from anything that is state funded or official. It's become very blurry and more medical. And, also, unless you have a very big medical concern, it's more about like, yeah, you're doing well, do whatever you want in your house, and nobody is there to guide you, right? So do you remember what were your big fears or questions when you at the beginning?
I think that, so I think, again, I was quite lucky in that. I think my husband and I both feel quite confident. So, for example, if there were health visitors, we ended up declining their service, actually. So again, for those of you who aren't in the UK, a health visitor is kind of supposed to, they're not really medically trained. They're supposed to just come into your home every now and again, check on how your baby is doing. And things like that, we actually ended up declining because we felt like we kind of wanted to trust our instincts as parents. But what I did find very anxiety provoking, I think, especially in the early days, was I think the same as many parents probably, but like my own anxiety. So I was less worried about how I was raising my daughter. I was very lucky in that breastfeeding worked well for us. And kind of, I felt again like I was able to trust my gut a lot in the early days. We co-slept and kind of did all the things that I had kind of imagined we would do. But what I found a real shock to the system in the early days was my own anxiety. I think, I would be kept awake at night thinking, what if I hold her and fall down the stairs? Or what if I get on a bus with her and I have a heart attack and somehow I get separated from her? So I think my big fears were very much linked to my own anxiety and kind of just this terror when you love someone so much. I'd never loved anyone as much as I loved my daughter. And I think that was a big shock to me and my husband to suddenly go, well, if I had to choose one of you, I choose her. And I think, hopefully we'll never be in that situation, right? But I found that a real shock. I found her was almost the easiest thing, like looking after a baby. But I found the way that I engaged with the outside world, and we were the first in our friendship group as well to have children. So that was a big shock, and how my relationship with my friends changed a lot and shifted. And the friendships that I thought would be really engaged with our daughter, who ended up just not really being interested in her and kind of, stopping getting invited to things. So I feel very lucky that a lot of my first time fears were not so much around her and keeping her alive. I found having a baby quite simple, actually, especially in the early weeks and months. But it was all of the kind of it was about me as a mother, I suppose, and my birth as a mother and how I then related to everything around me. It's a real roller coaster, I think, and one that you don't get prepared for enough. The fact that suddenly how you perceive yourself and your identity can completely shift and change. I wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah, I think nothing prepares us until we have the first child, basically. It's feels much easier on that matter when we have a second one. There are some other stuff coming into the picture, but definitely what you say is the first time we are, really responsible for the life of someone else, right? And it's like a bit freaky. And I suppose you have read that book, What Mothers Do?
Yeah.
Did you read that one? Yes. And she does explain that feeling in that book. And I remember reading it after having my second. And I was at last reassured that I had this odd thought about, like when I was bathing my child, thinking, what if she drowned? What if I push her under the water? And that's an horrible thought. But basically, it's because that kind of give us a kick and wake us up and make us more aware of that baby. So it's a totally normal process, but nobody's talking to us about that. So it's good to break through those, fears and being able to explain to new parents, okay, those fears are normal. That anxiety is normal, and it's normal if you feel that way. Okay, it's natural, and that's the reason why. And we're going to overcome that. And as the days pass and weeks pass, it becomes better, right?
It does, and it did for me anyway. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that should be prescribed to all pregnant parents. It'd be a good thing to read before having a child. Yeah,
there's so many things that we could have done before we had the children, right? And that's something that I'm kind of keen. As you say, you were very much in line with your husband about how to raise a child, even without, you didn't know about that because maybe you didn't discuss. I suppose like many parents, you don't chat when, like when you're young and free without children about the way you want to raise children. And that can be a big shock as well for the relationship. And sometimes also you change your mind. I had a very clear idea about, I wanted to discipline my children. I was disciplined the old fashioned way. And for me, when I was seeing children misbehaving, at the till in the supermarket, I was like, oh my God, my children will never do that. They will never ask for sweets at the till. And obviously, yes, of course it happens to me. But I was quite like that when I was very young and like 23 and chatting with my husband about the way we were going to raise the children. I was very clear that I'm going to discipline, in a very strict way, my own children. And that totally was not the case after, I learned better. And
there's a meme or like quote that I've seen in places, and it's something like, parenting was much easier when I was parenting my hypothetical children. But yes.
Absolutely. That's the case. Yeah.
Having children, parenting is a dream. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is this kind of fantasy, motherhood that we can imagine. We're going to be a mother, and what's the amazing thing we're going to do. And obviously, in that fantasy, you don't imagine, having difficulty breastfeeding. You don't imagine that your child is not going to sleep through the night. You don't imagine that your child is not going to enjoy that amazing activities you have set up for him, or that amazing outing at the zoo that is going to have tantrum after tantrum all day at the zoo, and that's not the outing you have imagined. And obviously, we don't imagine all of that. No. And so, as you say, it's a shock to the system when we are confronted to the reality. But I suppose we need a bit of fantasy to be able to decide to have a child.
I think it works both ways as well. I think you don't always imagine the hard bits, and some of the hard points of parenting are, the hardest things that I think most people have ever done. But I think you also cannot, before you have a child, really comprehend the huge amount of joy and like the absolute love. So I think it kind of, it works both ways. I think I just I can't imagine how to describe it to someone who doesn't have a child, the way that you can feel about your child. It's something I had just never experienced before, that kind of real punch in the gut, like, this is what people talk about when they talk about how much they love their children. I get it now. So it's a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, there is a beautiful song in French about the singer singing that I love her, I could die for her. That's basically what he says in the song. And that's a very popular song. And I always listen to that song and like the song and imagine that he obviously was talking about a woman. And then listening to the song after I had my first child, I said, it doesn't talk about a woman. It's talking about his daughter. And indeed, I did some research about that song. And it's very obvious. And that it did say that it was about his daughter. And, until you have a child, you cannot understand that song the proper way. So it's a good reminder. I still love that song for that reason. And it's a good reminder for me. So you've talked about the fact that you read a lot as a first-time mom. I do know that you still read a lot because you share so many, good books to read. And one that I'm reading, thanks to your recommendation, by the way. What are the books that you would recommend? I don't know, your top 5, I don't know many to ask you to say, or the ones that you really like or that you like to recommend among other things. So
ones that I recommend the most, the one, like the number one book, if you just had to read one book on parenting that I would recommend to anyone, is a book called Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Khon. And it's just a mind-blowing book if you haven't thought about these things before. So very, very briefly, Alfie Khon basically talks about how we can draw a distinction between conditional parenting, which is where your behavior as a parent changes on the condition of your child's behavior, versus unconditional parenting, so parenting without praise, rewards, punishment, shaming, where you respond kind of empathetically and with compassion regardless of your child's behavior. And we read this, my husband and I actually both read it when my daughter was really young. And I think it felt instinctively like it really chimed with a lot of our beliefs, but just putting it into words. And also he packs the book with absolutely loads of really good, rigorous research as well. So it makes it very good as well if you want to explain your kind of like hippie newfangled way of parenting to maybe older generations or people who haven't really come across this way of parenting before. So that is a fantastic book, Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Khon. A book I really loved in the early days of parenting was The Gentle Sleep book by Sarah Ockwell-Smith, because my daughter was a baby who did not sleep ever. She didn't sleep at all until she was 18 months. And when I say she doesn't sleep, I mean she really didn't. She would wake up every night between 20 and 45 minutes, and just kind of breastfeed all night and was awake all night, and was a very light sleeper. And I think that book helped me to realize how normal it is for babies and children and actually adults to sleep in a kind of different way to, I think, the way that we've been sold in society. And it just made me feel really normal and really reassured. So again, for someone with very young children, I think that is such a great book to read if you are at all concerned about your child's sleep or feel pressured by other people to kind of have a baby who sleeps through the night all the time. Yeah, I found that one was really good, and very reassuring. And whenever a friend of mine tells me they're pregnant, it's the first book I kind of buy them for the early days of their pregnancy journey. Another book that I really, really love, and kind of for all ages, is a book called Nurture Shock. And it is so great. It's, again, a very, very evidence-based book. It's something that I look for a lot in the books that I read. I think there's so many wonderful books out there that are kind of more opinionated, but I like books to have kind of good, solid research. So Nurture Shock is such a great one. And it looks at a whole range of different chapters. So it has a chapter, again, similar to Alfie Khon on praise, and why actually, although instinctively we often feel as parents like the best thing to do for our children is to give them loads of praise and to kind of everything they do, encourage them, it kind of looks at the science behind it, showing that actually maybe praise is not such a great thing to do for our children. There's also a really fantastic chapter on race and why white parents really need to talk to their children about race. And again, I think a lot of the kind of mainstream culture or kind of view around race is that, especially if you're a white parent, you know, you shouldn't talk to your child about race because the idea is that you want to raise children who are colorblind, and it looks as this is a, you know, the fact that this is a real myth. And actually, if we want to raise children in a more equal society, then we need to talk about these kind of things really early on and regularly as well. And it also talks to about things like how to encourage language development in very young children, why teenagers need more sleep. So it goes into a whole range of kind of quite interesting topics all around. So that is a really great one to have on your bookshelf as well. And you can kind of come back to it, I think, at different stages in your child's development, which is really lovely. Then you asked for 5, so that's 3. I'll give you a Montessori book because there are just so many. So a couple of Montessori books that I've really loved have been Montessori Read and Write, which again I recommend a lot. And I think that even if your child is going to go down a very mainstream route of education, I think Montessori Read and Write works really well, either as a standalone if you're planning on home educating, but also if your child's going to go to a mainstream school system, it integrates really well as well. And often I get asked by parents, well, you know, how can my child is showing an interest in letters or showing an interest in kind of learning to read or sounding out things, how can I take it further? And although I think it's quite an old book and it's quite hard to get new copies now, I think they're mostly kind of secondhand copies that come out. It's really good and it's worth getting a hold of if you can put your hands on it. And also the book, The Montessori Toddler by Simone Davies, who I think she actually, the first one of it, she printed herself, but has now been working with a publisher. So hopefully it will be more widely distributed. It's such a great book. And she talks about a whole range of kind of Montessori approaches to different things around toddler age. So if you have a toddler, it's such a great book to look at. And I would really recommend it. It's really beautifully designed and it's very wise as well, and has a really good mix, I think, of kind of the philosophy of kind of respectful parenting, which I think for me really underlies the whole of the Montessori approach. But she also gives loads of practical advice and kind of beautiful photos on how to set up spaces for young children. And yeah, it's a really lovely read, even if your child is older than a toddler.
Yeah, 5 very good books. And yeah, all of those books I like as well. And I like the fact that you say that you recommend books that are evidence-based. And it's really my way to recommend books as well. I think that's why I fell in love with Montessori because it's based on the observation of the child. So there is nothing that's come from the top. There is nothing that is like, oh, like I have an idea about how to raise children, or that works very well with my two, so I'm doing it. It's really about the observation of the child all the time. And all those books that you recommended are based on that, on research and what works, what doesn't work, and why. So yeah, 5 very interesting books. Simone Davies came on this conference and chatted with me, so I'm sure she's going to be delighted to be recommended. And that book is going to be available from April on Amazon and everywhere. So yes, it's going to be much easier to grab a copy from April. So yeah, great. 5 very good books that I'm sure many parents will start to dig in. No. And so yeah, basically tell me a bit more about, you started a blog. That was your first thing.
Yeah.
What kind of prompt you to start a blog? Because I know many mothers, when they start to be at home, they kind of feel maybe like, okay, what do I do? What's the purpose of my life with my child? And I think, social media really allow us to show what we do. And, 11 years ago, when it was me, it was just the blogs. Okay, we had some small blogs, and that was all we had. And nowadays, you can, Instagram is like a small blogs, basically. Yes. It's like an instant blog. So, what prompted you to start a blog, and what did it bring you as a mother?
So, I think when I started it, I wasn't really sure why I started it. I didn't start it with an aim in mind. I think I felt like many mothers, a surge of creativity after having my daughter, and wanted to kind of do something. I took a year of maternity leave, and I wasn't sure if I was going to go back to my old job or not. So before having my daughter, I worked as a senior press officer in a government department after having worked kind of in various kind of political press and PR jobs for that period since leaving university. So I think once I'd settled into parenting, I kind of had this real urge to share and to do something creative and to do some writing. But if you look at my blog in the early days, I didn't expect anyone would read it. It was just, I thought my mum might read it. So, it was very much here's what we got up to today. Today we went to the park. Here's some pictures of my daughter, especially as, my mum always used to say to me, when you're so sleep deprived in the early months, you just won't remember it. So, make sure you take lots of photos and have a kind of recollection of it. And so for me, it was almost as a journal as well. I really wanted to remember these moments that I had with my daughter. And it kind of just grew from there. And the more that I started writing, the more I kind of enjoyed it. And the more I started talking about not just our, this is what we get up to every day. Here's our little Montessori treasure basket we've made, or, this is how we're doing heuristic play. It started to be more about, this is actually how we're raising her, and this is some of the philosophies behind how we want to raise her, and this is our approach to parenting. And the more that I wrote, the more I would get kind of emails and messages and feedback from people saying this really resonates to me and really speaks to me. So it was nice to get that encouragement. And I think my blog has gone through periods where I've written a lot and where I haven't written a lot, which, I wish it was more consistent, but it just hasn't been. So, there were periods when, for example, Frida was just not sleeping at all, where I just blog very much, and then I'd get a little bit more sleep or have a bit more energy and write a bit more. But yeah, it's evolved quite a lot from being a kind of this is our days and this is what we get up to together, to being more what it is now, which is a resource for other parents to use. So I don't really share in the same way kind of about our daily life. But in the same vein, I do share more of our daily life on Instagram. So Instagram has become a kind of a second content channel for me, I guess. And actually for me now, Instagram is probably more important than my blog, because I tend to update Instagram more regularly, and I find that it's just easier to have that community and build that connection with other people on Instagram as well, because you can kind of reply to their comments much more easily, and you can go in and kind of find out about them, and it feels like a bit more of a community as well. But I do try and continue with my blog as well, because I like it, and I do actually sometimes, probably really sad of me to admit this, but I do sometimes actually go back and read my really early posts and just remember what I used to do with Frida, because my mum was right, I can't remember a lot of those early days. It's kind of a joyous, exhausted blur, and it's quite nice to actually go back and go like, oh yeah, this is what we were doing at this age. Or for example, when I've got a nephew who is about a year and a half younger than Frida. So it was quite nice to send my sister like, oh, this is what Frida was doing at this age. These are some activities you might enjoy doing. And it's still quite sweet. I sometimes get messages from people saying that they have gone back kind of into the archives and looking at what Frida was up to for activity suggestions. And that's always quite sweet as well. But yeah, the blog has kind of naturally shifted and grown. And as I say, because I didn't start it with any agenda in mind, it was able to kind of grow quite naturally and just follow my interests, which has been really nice because it hasn't felt, I haven't felt kind of constrained by it. It's not like I started a baby fashion blog and then suddenly realized like, oh, I kind of don't want to do that anymore. Or yeah, it's evolved quite naturally. It's been a really fun process.
Yeah, and so from that little blog, you became a parenting coach. So can you tell me a bit more about that? How did you evolve to become a parenting coach? What was, the desire behind that, and what prompts, that journey for you?
Yeah, so after having Frida, we decided while I was on maternity leave, but basically I wouldn't go back to my old job for various reasons. But essentially, it was going to be really hard to go back part-time. This is probably a whole other interview for another day, but they certainly didn't make it appealing for me to come back part-time. And to be completely honest with you, I just couldn't bear the idea of leaving her either. At one, I didn't feel ready to leave her, and I don't think she was ready to leave me. And we were in a very fortunate position where we were just about able to kind of get by on my husband's salary. And we just decided, we'll take the plunge and we'll see what happens. So the aim was never for me to always be a full-time stay-at-home mum. We always knew that I would go into some kind of paid work, but we didn't know quite what that would look like. So shortly after she was 1, I trained as a doula and also as an antenatal teacher, specialising in hypnobirthing. So although I didn't work as a hands-on doula, because again, it was too unpredictable with night times and Frida was still breastfeeding a lot at night at that moment, but I did start taking on clients for antenatal work. So working with them over a series of evenings together or with a group over a weekend. And I really enjoyed part of that, but I also found it quite frustrating that it was such a short amount of time in those parents' lives. And I almost felt like, yes, there's so much resource out there for parents who want to do antenatal education. There are so many hypnobirthing teachers and amazing antenatal teachers who are doing so many cool things. And yeah, there are loads of brilliant workers as well. Sorry, it's gotten really bright in here. It's a bit better. So many workers kind of doing some very cool ideas. And I didn't feel like I had very much new to bring to the table. What I did love about it is what I do now. So I took, I read all the books on birth and all the books on kind of those early days of child rearing. So kind of the postnatal period, plus the 4th trimester. Took that information and tried to condense it into a really accessible, kind of easy to digest course for parents to do. And they really enjoyed it and had really great births and really good experiences. So I knew that I wanted to continue doing work with parents, but I just felt like that birth sphere, I felt so frustrated that they would have their birth and then I wouldn't hear from them again. And I felt like actually that was a really cool bit of their journey that they were just getting to. That's better. And as I was doing it, I was getting more and more emails and messages from people reading my blog going, like, is there a way to work with you? I read the stuff that you write and it kind of, it's completely changed my outlook on parenting, or it's really impacted the way that I experience my children or I relate to them. Is there any way to kind of work with you? So this was kind of in the back of my mind as well, thinking of moving into doing what I did for birth and the kind of postnatal period, but for parenting. So bringing all of the books, and I was reading, books and books and books and books on parenting anyway. So it's really tied into my own interest. So I was reading for myself anyway, and I kind of felt like, my friends who would come to me for parenting advice would go like, you kind of need to share this. But I knew that I didn't want to just work with 1 or 2 parents at a time, because it just felt like a really bad use of my time, essentially. So what frustrated me again about doing birth work is I would maybe work with, as I said, 1 couple or a few couples, and that would take me away from my family for a whole weekend or for a whole evening. And although it was fine and I was getting clients and it was kind of working, it felt a bit like my husband and I sometimes felt like ships in the night. He would come home from work and I would go off and teach a client, and then I'd come back and go to bed and, or be up all night with hot water. So it kind of felt like something needed to shift, but I didn't quite know how that would look yet. So continued writing, continued blogging. I had a horrific year and had 5 back-to-back baby losses, 5 back-to-back miscarriages, and kind of all sense of work that year sort of went out the window. I stopped booking new clients. I was doing a little bit of freelance writing work for a doula as well. And kind of, that was not my focus at all. And then we decided that we would have a break from all of that last year, and was finally able to kind of put all of my energy into it was like that kind of creative energy that had been being used up getting pregnant over and over again was almost able to kind of then be transformed into the work that I do now. And I suddenly had this real burst of energy after I'd recovered from the final miscarriage that I had, and just felt like, okay, it clicked a bit, and I was like, this is what I want to do. So now I run 4 different online courses. I also have a monthly membership group, and I work with some clients one-to-one, although again I kind of limit the number of one-to-one clients that I do, because in terms of time I still work very much part-time, and it's it feels kind of in some ways less effective, although I really enjoy the fact that I get to really go deep with those clients as well. So it's a kind of trade-off. So I like the fact that I get to have just a few quite intimate one-to-one clients, and then I get to work with bigger groups on a larger scale, and that feels like a really good balance at the moment. But yeah, I've been very very lucky in that there's been a really good response to the work that I do, and I think there's obviously a real need for the kind of work that both you and I do, and I think there's a real I like to think there's a real growing interest in these new ways of being with children, and these ways of educating children and being with them as parents, and looking for a kind of more peaceful solution. So whenever I feel a bit depressed about the future of where our humanity is going, I try and come back to the fact that, actually, I do think this is a growing realization now that there is a different way to be with children and a different way to kind of engage and interact with them. So I feel buoyed and hopeful by that. But yeah, it's been, again, I feel very, very lucky, but it's just been a really organic process for me. I didn't really set out to go and be self-employed. It's never something I've had any interest in doing previously. None of my family are self-employed. The word entrepreneur kind of sends shivers down my spine. It's something I relate to, I think, because so much of the language around business and entrepreneurship is so typically macho and male, and it's all about like smashing it and being a boss, and none of that stuff really appeals to me. It's not my cup of tea. But actually, it's been really lovely to kind of have the opportunity to develop something which I feel really passionately about, but which also allows me to raise Frida in the way that we want to raise her. And if it stopped being kind of compatible with how we want to raise her and homeschooling her, then she would come first. So that, I have to keep really clear that that's the main priority for both me and my husband, is to be able to raise her in the way that we feel is what we want to do. But yeah, it's been a really lovely journey.
And as you say, there is a rise of gentle parenting, or whatever we want to call it, because there are so many words around that. But basically, it's like knowing our children. There is this kind of desire from parents to really know, who are our children and what is the best way to just nurture them. And because like maybe in the 80s, 90s, when we were young, we were kind with the children, but there was still this idea that we had to control them and to make them fit into a mold. And I feel now that it's more about, okay, what does a child need, and how do I adapt myself to that child to make sure that my child is really nurtured and can, develop his full potential, which is something that we say a lot in the Montessori world.
Yes.
And, yes, indeed, we can be sometimes depressed when we see the world, but at the same time, it's so much better already that at some other time in history. And I think that rise in the movement of gentle parenting is going definitely to change the world when our children will be grown up. And definitely, it's amazing to witness. Absolutely. And, I'm not that old, but obviously, 11 years ago when I had my first child, we didn't have all of that. It was like, finding something that was not Joe Frost, Tracy Holt, or, all those super nannies. It it was very difficult, very difficult. There was nothing, or there was some kind of huge, child psychology books, but that was not giving us parents any, easy tips to follow or something that we can understand as a parent. So yeah, definitely having people like you, like me, like all the people on this Montessori conference, basically, being there to guide parents, it's amazing to witness. And so it's a great joy for me to put everybody together this week, to empower parents, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the most radical things that we can do as parents, like I think often parents feel really, kind of in those early days of mothering, and I think it is especially with mothers, I think it can feel really, like maybe you have lost some of your identity, maybe you haven't gone back to work, or maybe you're, there's been how you feel. And I think often mothers feel like, well, how, I feel like I'm not maybe contributing to society in the way that I was before. Sometimes I talk to people and they're like, oh, I used to be so politically active before I have children, and now I don't want to take my tiny baby on a march anymore or go to demos, and I feel like very strongly, as you say, that this kind of parenting is changing the world, one small child at a time. And it really is such a radical shift we can do in our parenting. I think it's one thing. We want to have a more equal and just society. We change the way that we deal with children. We change the way that we raise and educate them. So yes, I feel like it's a really exciting time to be in this sphere of work at the moment. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that it seems to be a kind of a slightly more mainstream now. I feel like it used to be much more, kind of continuum concept, hippie-ish. It was all about like you're either an attachment parent or you're a kind of very strict, rigid parent. And then now I feel like we're starting to see a really lovely kind of fluidity in parenting, and putting kind of, the child's need first, but seeing that there are many ways of going about meeting our children's needs respectfully, and that it can vary from parent to parent. So yeah, I'm very encouraged.
Yeah, that's great. And so you've talked a bit about your courses, and I know that one of your courses is called The Beautiful Childhood. That's the name of your group as well. I love how you have, choose that title. So what does it mean, for you? Because I suppose that's come a bit from your own idea of childhood. For you, family, what does it mean, a beautiful childhood?
A beautiful childhood. So for me, I think the fundamental, at the heart of a beautiful childhood, I think, is having respect for the child. I think if you're not respected, if you're overly controlled, if your autonomy is kind of being scuppered, then your childhood is potentially not going to be that beautiful. So I think it's fundamentally about how your parents and the kind of caregivers around you engage with you, if they really see you for who you are, rather than just trying to kind of put ideals of what a child should be doing at a certain stage onto you. And I think that when children are truly seen and truly heard and truly respected and cherished for who they are, then, that for me is really at the core of what a beautiful childhood is. And I think, in a similar way to how I think often for Montessori, people get sucked in through like the beautiful materials or the trays, for me, this is the heart of Montessori. And this is why, we'll talk about this probably a bit later, but for me, the heart of having a kind of beautiful child is the way that that child is respected, and the way that they are treated with empathy and connection, communicated with gently and peacefully. But I do think for me as well, it kind of encompasses a sense of, and I think it all links together, but the sense of kind of slowing down a little bit as well in childhood. I think there is so much rush in the modern age, and I don't think that's necessarily parents' fault at all. We have to all meet the bills, and we have to pay rent or our mortgages, and life can be quite challenging sometimes. There's people sometimes working 1-2 jobs, trying to balance everything, having to drop their child off at preschool childcare and then school, and then having after school childcare. So I think it's not necessarily something that, I don't want to come across as overly negative. I see why it happens a lot of the time, and often parents don't really have a choice. But I do think that where we can, just trying to make pockets of our children's lives slower, and trying to take away so much expectation that we can have on them, and just giving them the freedom. I think, again, it comes back to a sense of being free to kind of develop at your own pace, but giving them the freedom just to play or go outside and kind of have time to themselves, or they can just potter around and kind of climb on the sofas and do whatever it is that they need to do without constantly being scrutinized, or, what are they learning in this moment, or is this developmentally appropriate, and just kind of letting them be within that. For me, that really is kind of what a beautiful childhood is about. And obviously there are other things we can talk about too, reading loads of books to children, giving them lots of time outdoors, having a kind of a calm home. But I think, yeah, for me, fundamentally, beautiful childhood. I don't believe that you can have a beautiful childhood if you're disrespected and kind of overly controlled all the time. So that's what the heart of having a beautiful childhood is for me.
I like that way, we say slow childhood. And I think I've commented once saying that for me, it was just lazy day.
Yeah.
When my children were young. I didn't have a concept for that. It was just like, okay, just let's stay at home, enjoy yourself, or we take our time. And definitely we had a lot of lazy days, and they were the best days.
How now I think people feel so much pressure from social media or from Pinterest, and they kind of, you look at books, and this is why I always feel like I need to temper what I say when, sometimes people ask for activity ideas and things. And I think it's lovely to have some nice activities that you do with your child if you both enjoy them. But sometimes you see parents who will spend hours setting up these beautiful invitations to play, or they'll set up these elaborate crafts. And then, of course, the child just comes along and is not really interested because it hasn't been led by them. It's frustrating for everyone, I think. And I just feel like, reclaiming that laziness, because actually, the kind of the hands-off element of parenting and just allowing them to be, I think now we need that more than ever when there's so much pressure to, well, is your child reading yet? Are they counting yet? Are they ready for preschool? Are they ready for school? Are they doing all of these things? And I think it can feel completely exhausting, not just for the child, but as a parent as well, to kind of constantly be on alert, thinking well, am I ticking all the boxes? Am I enriching their lives as much as I can? And just taking a step back and exactly what you were saying, just enjoying your child in those moments without pressure with you. I think we have so much of that pressure now, and it's about being able to, something I always say to my clients is, when you're saying yes to stuff all the time, that also means that you're saying no to something. And maybe if you're saying yes to all of these after school enrichment activities or these elaborate activities that you've set up and these crafts and things, what are you saying no to? Potentially you're saying no to some, lovely, relaxed quality time, just hanging out with a hot chocolate and a book. And I think, there's always a fine line. And I think especially, some children do really thrive on having more structured activities. But I think it's about knowing that you're allowed to say no as a parent.
That's good. And so let's chat a bit about your homeschooling journey now, if you don't mind. Do you recall when you decided to homeschool Frida? If it was a project from the beginning, or you just started to talk about it? Tell me more about that.
Well, I think that at the beginning, in the very early days, my husband and I still kind of felt like I would have to go back to work. We didn't know how we would make it happen to not go back to work. So for most of that first year of Frida's life, we kind of just felt like, well, it's just something we're going to have to happen. So I didn't see how homeschooling would be possible. We thought maybe we would try and find a really gentle nursery or something, but we didn't really. I don't think we would have seen how it could have happened, although I would have always loved to. It was always a secret dream for me to be able to home educate her. I was personally home educated until I was 6, so not ages. But those first few years, so I didn't go into any form of childcare until I went into, in the UK, what's known as year 2. So that's age kind of 6 and 7, you go into that. And so for me, especially, those early years, I always felt very strongly like I really wanted to keep her at home because I had such an idyllic childhood, I guess, those early years. My parents were incredibly poor, very, very, very poor, to the point where I think sometimes, they couldn't even put enough food on the table. But that I don't remember any of that. I just remember days spent at the park every day with my mum, going to the beach, reading books together, going to the library together all the time. And I felt like that was such a wonderful way to be with your child, but I didn't think it was possible, so I didn't really allow myself to dream. When we started talking seriously about me not going back to work, we started having really serious discussions about home educating. And I think I felt like it would be more of a difficult decision to kind of get my husband on board with the homeschooling idea. But actually, from basically day one, when we started talking about it, my husband was like, yeah, I think this sounds really good. And again, I'd read a lot of different books on education and, looking at, for example, Montessori, but also looking at Waldorf, Charlotte Mason, unschooling, the forest school and Scandinavian philosophies. looking at kind of different models and philosophies of how young children could and should be educated, and feeling like increasingly I just couldn't see how my ideals and my husband's ideals around especially early years education would fit into a mainstream model. And a private school in London is incredibly expensive, and even if we had an endless budget, I still don't think we would choose to send her to one, because there just isn't, locally to us, there isn't, for example, a good Montessori school. There are a couple of Steiner schools, but nothing that felt like a really good fit for us. So when we started looking at it seriously, I think it felt a bit like, okay, you know what, we're going to try and do this. And we have never put a kind of end goal on it. I personally would really like to at least do up to 7, because I feel like in a lot of countries, like in Scandinavian countries, for example, there's no formal education up until 7, and I feel like that model works really well. So I've always kind of said, hopefully we'll get up to age 6 and 7, and then we'll see, and we'll see what she wants to do as well. And I think it has to work for everyone. I don't feel like any individual in the family should have to sacrifice their dreams or needs or hopes for someone else's. So we'll have to figure out what works for her and what works for us as well. But yeah, as you say, we've just passed the formal deadline for school applications, which I guess is our first milestone. We kind of had a mini one last year when everyone was applying to preschools and starting preschool. Yes, Frida should technically be starting school in September and won't be. So it feels kind of, really exciting, although we take quite a relaxed approach to kind of education, especially in these early years. So I don't think that come September our days will start looking any different. It's not like suddenly we're going to sit down and try and recreate school at home. And again, some families do, and if that's what works for you, then that's cool. But I think for us, we will continue to take much more of a child-led approach, where essentially we just read loads of books together and play loads together and go outside and talk loads and answer questions and go to museums and just kind of generally enjoy each other's company. So yeah, I don't see us sitting down with a schedule. And of course I do observe her, and I try and make sure that I am meeting her needs through the materials available to her and through the home environment as well. And I change our home environment a lot. So we don't live in a hugely big house. So anyone who kind of follows me online will see we're constantly changing the layout of how our home works, and changing bits of furniture around. And we try and really make sure that even though we don't have a huge amount of space, we try and follow her needs that way. But yeah, I don't think we'll suddenly start sitting down with worksheets. But who knows? Maybe she'll really want to.
Well, you do your own worksheet. You draw in your little stuff and your little activities.
Actually, yeah.
Well, that was a cute activity, and so easy to set up, obviously. So what do you think for you is the main advantage of homeschooling, and what would be, maybe you still have something that is very difficult in that journey of homeschooling? So if you can just explain both.
So for us, the benefit of homeschooling was that essentially we could go at Frida's pace. I think my husband and I both feel very strongly that children do not all develop at the same time, have the same needs. And for us, the idea that you could get 30 children of roughly the same age, but at very different points of their development, and kind of provide each of them a tailor-made education that really fits them, it just wasn't going to happen. And I guess for us, if having the opportunity to be able to really follow our daughter's development. So for example, at the moment she's nearly 4, but she's really interested in maths and numbers. She keeps asking us, what's 4 plus 6? What's 7 plus 2? And she's starting to do lots of numbers and adding in her head. And it's really nice that we can just take loads of time to chat to her about numbers, and we can, get blocks and add them together and kind of, really nurture that interest that maybe if she was in school, wouldn't be available for her yet, because other children maybe aren't. Equally, things like she still finds it quite difficult to to draw and to write, and whereas lots of her friends a similar age to her are now drawing quite detailed pictures, she finds it really hard to kind of draw what she has in her head. And I can see that if she, again, was kind of in a school where she was expected to start, drawing or writing, maybe in a moment when she wasn't in the mood for it or wasn't ready for it, I can see that would take something which is potentially really enjoyable and she just hasn't developed those skills yet, and make it something that's really painful for her and that really kind of sucks the joy out of it. So I think it both is kind of allowing her to take it slow when she still needs time to develop a skill, but also if she's interested in something, to allow her to kind of go with it. So for us, that was a big part of wanting to homeschool. But also, I think it has to be said, a big part of us wanting to homeschool was also that we want to continue to, for her to be in a really peaceful, respectful environment. And I think a lot of the things that mean a lot to us in parenting, so not having punishment, not having praise, not having kind of overly controlled, scheduled time, these are things which in most mainstream UK schools, this is just a fact of life. You talk too much, you get put on the naughty bit of the blackboard. You do well, you get a gold star. You have to put your hand up to ask to go to the toilet. So all of this did not at all sit well with our beliefs. And, it probably will be the fact that, if she does go into the school system at some point, or if she, whatever she ends up doing, maybe in some workplace environments, who knows, she'll have to encounter that. But I think that knowing what we know about the early years and how important the first chunk of a child's development in their life is, I think we wanted to do everything we could to kind of, protect her from that as much as possible. And just, I guess, that maybe sounds overly negative, but I guess just to give her as much time as we could where she was able to direct her own activities and be free. That said, homeschooling is, has a lot of challenges. I think I sometimes feel quite lonely. Even though we live in London, there are lots of homeschooling groups. I haven't found one yet that has really connected with me, which I found quite sad and a bit of a shame. And I think there are such diverse groups and communities that I'm sure there is a group out there which will really fit with our kind of ethos and the way we are. But I haven't found one yet. And so sometimes I worry about that as well. Not just her having people who she sees regularly, but me as well. Also, a lot of our friends who are planning on homeschooling, who we have got really wonderful relationships with, are all planning on leaving London. So that also makes me feel quite anxious. But also, it's expensive in terms of time and, I guess amount that you could work more, but don't, it limits what my husband and I can do. And for example, at the moment, so my husband recently handed in his notice as a social work manager, and he's been studying for the last couple of months to take his work in a slightly different direction. But he's getting to a point now where he's starting to think about applying for different roles and different jobs. And he essentially has to get a job working 3 or 4 days a week, and really 3 days a week, because I need a couple of days to work. And he really wants to do that as well, because he really wants to be involved in her home education journey, and he just enjoys spending time with her so much. But that is, that necessarily then gives a limit to the kind of potentially career progression he can go for, and the amount of work that I'm able to do as well. That always has to come first. So there are definitely big drawbacks. And sometimes people ask, well, do you think everyone could homeschool or should homeschool? And frankly, I don't think everyone could. I think there's such a lack of support still, and a lack of kind of understanding around what home education is. And I think that, it is, you sacrifice quite a lot, I think, as a home educating family to be able to always be there with your child. But that said, it feels like a really positive sacrifice that we're really delighted to be able to make. And it feels like an enormous privilege to be able to do that as well. But I think we're happy that we can make it work at the moment. But there are definitely times, and also just times when I kind of panic a bit, because when you're doing something which is so different to the mainstream, you suddenly just think, oh, are we definitely making the right choice? When you talk about all your friends who are all making their applications to schools and thinking like, oh God, is our daughter just going to be really miserable and isolated and lonely because she's not spending all day with children? And you kind of then I go back to, I've got like a few different books and articles that I read whenever I'm feeling wobbly about home education. I go and read them, and then I'm like, okay, no, I feel better now. I'm remembering why we do this. But I think it always feels a bit strange to do something that's so still so countercultural.
Yeah, well, being on the other side, I remember trying to think about how to make it work if I wanted to homeschool, or to convince, as you say, it has to be a project that the whole family one agrees with. And we couldn't make it work at the time, because basically I was not doing this kind of job I'm doing now. So walking around a child being homeschooled was not possible at the time. But I was quite lucky in a way that they came to my Montessori school with me the early years. And now my youngest goes to Montessori schools, and that's the same kind of sacrifice in a way, because we have to make it work to be able to pay for that school, which is another kind of sacrifice. And I think, you said that you feel a bit like the guilt and the stress to choose that path. And I think when you are on the other side, when you couldn't make it work, the homeschooling, and especially in my case, because I'm always with parents who choosing another path, who are, going against the mainstream, even if they go to school. I'm always confronted to the fact that I didn't choose that path for my own children. So how does it influence, my own children to be, my eldest is in a mainstream school. So I like to see I don't want to say I like, but there are many things in the school that we don't agree with, and we have to live with that, and we have to raise a child who goes to mainstream. And I think that's the case for, still a majority of people. And, as you say, finding a homeschooling community was something very important, and I couldn't find that where I was at the time. And I think I was a bit scared to be alone and lonely. So we had to choose a path that was right for our family. And definitely, it's not easy. Whatever side you are on, it's not easy.
Such is life with children.
Yeah, that's life with children, absolutely. So you said that you have a kind of a very eclectic approach to homeschooling, taking what fit with obviously what Frida needs from different philosophies. But because it's a Montessori Parenting Conference, I wanted to ask you, what do you like about Montessori? What do you take from the Montessori philosophy that suits your family?
So I think for me, the main things of Montessori that I love are, as I've kind of talked about before, the fact that she was so respectful to children, and she really saw them as them. And I love the focus on observation in Montessori. I think that it's such a beautiful gift to be able to give a child, just to spend time watching them and kind of really trying to see them for themselves and what needs they have in that moment and what they're developing. And, she really saw a kind of, the child, for them, not just where they fit along a continuum, or, if they're an A grade or a C grade or a D grade, she just saw them in their whole. And I think that's just such a beautiful gift to offer children. I also really, really love what she writes about the prepared environment. I think that this is something we've really used in our own home, and just the difference of making small changes, especially once you've observed your child first, can have on your child, and the importance of having a beautiful environment. And when I say beautiful, I don't mean like lovely designer sofas and things, but just one which is, has maybe some fresh flowers, or has a candle burning, or has some art at your child's level where they can really engage. I think it all really ties into the fact that she obviously had so much respect for children. She really wanted to create an environment for them where they could kind of thrive and just be really happy. So I think for me, the prepared environment and the observation and respect for children is something that's huge for me. I mean, some of the Montessori materials are obviously wonderful. And, I love the way that it's kind of prepared, but I think for me, it's less about the kind of the clever materials and but more about really kind of the fundamental respect for children and how this shows up both in our parenting but also in our home, and how we kind of it's setting up children for success and setting them up so that they can be more independent, setting them up so that they can have more freedom. I think this freedom of the child is so important. So it feels like so beautifully aligned to so many of my own views around kind of how I want to parent my daughter. So it feels really lovely, and I feel like after all of the philosophies, it feels like a very good alignment. It's interesting. So I was fully signed up to be like a card carrying Montessori mom. When my daughter was younger, we had some Montessori materials and they were fantastic, and she really enjoyed them. And now she's a bit older, she doesn't, we do have a few Montessori materials that she uses, but she is just much happier spending all day kind of just doing imaginative play, talking to us day in, day out, having stories, reading books together, kind of pottering about and like fitting little bits of junk together. And she isn't a kind of, I guess, like a, I don't know, natural child in some of the Montessori materials, whereas interestingly I do know some other children the same age as her who are like such typical like Montessori kids, where they just they'll sit with an activity and really engage with it in a different way. So it's kind of, as she's gotten older, I've really had to live the truth of following your child, even if that child takes you in a slightly different path to where you expect it to go. And I know that you've said before as well that one of your children was much more like kind of typically Montessori and followed that and would happily work with all the materials in the way they're supposed to be worked with, whereas I think the thing was your son was just like, no, I want to do other stuff instead. So it's been quite learning that you can read all of these books, and I think sometimes I see parents who say, well, I've been reading about Montessori and I've got this material and my child's just not interested, and they feel so terrible about it. They're like, what am I doing wrong? Why is my child not interested in these lovely practical life activities I've set up for them? Or it works with other philosophies as well. Why is my Waldorf child not interested in like this lovely watercolor painting I've set up for them? And I think that once you can stop just putting your trust in what someone else is offering you for your child and kind of feel the confidence to just let yourself follow your child's needs, I think it just makes the whole process much less stressful. But yeah, I just love what Montessori writes, and I think her focus on peace and respect and that kind of holistic child development is really beautiful.
I often described Montessori as the first gentle parenting expert.
Yeah.
Any of the books I read, every time I read a book, I say, well, she said that in another way, but she said it. I love the books from Dr. Shefali about being more conscious as a parent. But for me, Maria Montessori said it. Maybe in one or two chapters when she talked about the spiritual preparation of the teacher, but it's exactly the same. And when we talk about, Alfie Khon giving us all the research about why praise and punishment is not good, well, Maria Montessori said it in her own time. She said she observed the children. She said, we were giving them this little, not stickers, but this little decoration to reward their good behavior, and they didn't care about it, so we stopped. That was it. She didn't need to do a big research. She did that in her first classroom, that was repeated and again in other classrooms, so she saw it, and she said it in a few sentences in some of the books, and that was it. So
radical. She was really a pioneer. She was a very cool woman.
So most of the time when I read a book, I say, well, Montessori said it. And it's a bit frustrating sometimes that she's not quoted by all those amazing experts as being one of the first doing that.
That's why.
Pardon?
I think it's because she's a woman. I think it's because
absolutely. That's what I think as well. That's what I think as well. Especially, reading the research, everything Piaget has written. It's very frustrating because he was connected to the Montessori movement. He definitely observed children in the Montessori classroom. They had a professional relationship. And then there is no mention of Maria Montessori in any books from Piaget. And it's frustrating. And yes, you're right. It's probably because she was a woman. Yeah, that's what I said as well. Okay, talked about the fact that you run a business and that allow you to keep homeschooling Frida, and at the same time, how do you make it work to run a business that is quite demanding? Even if it's part-time, I think when we work with parents, it's hard, to put a boundaries when we have parents emailing us or messaging us, especially now with social media, you start to have, all your social media giving you, these little messages, and you feel that you need to respond, in the moment, basically, to support people. And because we are, caring people. So how do you make it work?
So I think it's really hard. I actually caught a bit of your chat with Aubrey yesterday. And luckily I just looked up, she was talking about the same issue where she was kind of saying, well, I feel like you can either be really good at doing your business or really good at parenting. And the two together are just not compatible a lot of the time because your brain is just elsewhere, whatever you're doing. And I could really relate with some of that. I think for me, what I am learning and having to learn quickly is exactly as you mentioned about having better boundaries. So for example, although I run lots of like courses on Facebook and have a Facebook group, I actually don't have Facebook on my mobile phone. And I also don't have my work emails on my mobile phone either. If I could take Instagram off my phone, I would do it in a second, but unfortunately I can't. But at least taking Facebook and email off, basically take off like 2 of the 3 main ways that people contact me. So it means that when I have to like physically sit down on my laptop and decide I'm going to do some work before engaging with those. And that's been really important for me and kind of good at reducing my screen time as well. And yeah, just trying to have better boundaries in general. So I used to get a huge amount of emails asking essentially for kind of parenting advice, which left me feeling really stressed because I inevitably wouldn't have time to answer them all. And I just felt really and then I felt bad, and then I felt frustrated because it was such a big drain on my time and I wasn't getting paid for it. And just little things like I just put a note on my website by my contact page, just saying like, if you would like to ask a parenting question, then you're free to join my free Facebook group. But actually, I can't really commit to offering free parenting advice on my email because, I do try and get around to replying to every email I get, but it often just takes me so long that by then the question just isn't relevant anymore. And that stuff like that feels really uncomfortable when I first did it because I felt a bit like, well, it's a privilege that people trust you with their questions, but actually, no one has said anything negative, and it's really cut down my inbox. So I think it's about kind of focusing on where you are able to serve the community that you serve them from, and trying to kind of cut out the work that doesn't help you serve those communities. So I'm really, I feel very strongly about continuing to provide free content as well as paid for content. So I will always keep writing my blog. I will always keep doing Instagram posts and things. I'll always keep running a free Facebook group. But equally being kind of comfortable that I can draw a line and say, well, this means because I'm providing these things for free, but I'm actually not going to respond to or engage in long conversations online unless you're one of my one-to-one clients or unless you're in one of my courses and you have something you don't feel comfortable sharing. So that's been quite helpful. Also, I think the main thing is basically just having a supportive partner who is really committed to supporting me in my work, just as I am with him in his work, and who, when I have to work evenings and weekends, and when I'm like, I just have to get this up for the course that I'm running, will step in, wholeheartedly and just say like, that's fine. I'll look after our daughter. You just go off and do the work that you need to do. I don't think I could have done it without him. I really don't. I don't know what I would have done. But yeah, having someone who is really cheering you on has been really helpful for me as well. And being able to kind of, sometimes say, well, you know what, maybe this weekend I'm not going to be around much because I just have to get this piece of work done and I don't have enough time in the week. But it feels like a lot of a dance at the moment. Sometimes I have to step in so that he can do more of what he's doing at the moment. Sometimes he steps in for me, but I feel like having a really open and honest conversation regularly with him about how we're doing with our work and where we need to support each other. It is a dance and it is a real juggle. But I think, we can make it work and we do make it work. But yeah, I think having a supportive partner and also getting better at being more boundaried. I've also just hired a very part-time assistant who's going to start working with me in February, which I'm really excited about because it means I spend so much of my time, I don't know about you, doing like admin, which like, it gives me a huge amount of, it's time that I could be spending creating more free content, for example, or, working on providing more content for my existing courses and my membership group. And so that felt like quite a scary decision because, having another person come and kind of join in the work that you're doing felt like, can I afford this? And is it a good idea? But actually, now that I've had a conversation with her, I'm so excited that she's going to be able to give me, it's not a huge amount of time each month, but just kind of those hours where she's able to support me will free up hopefully some more of my time so that I'm not having to work every weekend or not having to work, some evenings, and I'd actually rather be spending quality time with my husband. I was saying to my husband, I'm trying to see this money as not just, it's like I'm not just buying admin help, but I am actually buying more time for us as a family to all be together, so that I'm not having to stay up, or like sit on a Saturday morning while they go to a park reconciling spreadsheets. So yeah, and I think also that is something that maybe isn't talked about enough. And we don't have any help at home at the moment, but I'm going to hire a cleaner soon as well. And yeah, I think that you can't do everything without help. You just can't. Something has to give. Either your work gives, or your relationship gives, or your parenting gives, but you cannot hold everything at once at the same time. So yeah, I'm really excited about having more help, and I feel really proud of doing it. So I think, it would be nice to see. I think we live in such an interesting time for online business, where you can kind of see the successes of people everywhere. But I think often there's not much discussion around, well, what help and support do you have to enable you to do that? And I feel, I want to be really open about that, but I have a really supportive person that he's been able to, up until recently, when he quit his job, he was working compressed hours over 4 days a week, so that I had a day a week to work. And although it doesn't sound like a lot, actually a day a week is so much better than nothing. I know a lot of amazing mothers, like, for example, Nicole Kavanagh, who runs courses with Aubrey, who I don't think has any childcare. 2 of her children go to Montessori school. But apart from that, I think that she does all of her work like in the early mornings and in the evenings and in nap time for her youngest child. So, it feels like, actually, compared to some people, although you can be like, oh, 1 day a week is not much, actually it's so much just to know that you have that time to work every week. So yeah, it's a balance, but and it's never one that I think will feel particularly great and amazing. I think that I'll always end up feeling guilty about something, but just kind of have to see what happens and say, yeah, that's all I can do.
Yeah. And if you were employee in a team, you wouldn't be on your own. You would have people helping you with part of your job. So being self-employed doesn't mean that you have to do it all by yourself. Sometimes we have to at the beginning, when the project is starting and you don't have money to delegate anything. But definitely, yes, even if we love this job and we are caring people and we want to help people, it's come with a cost. And we always need to find a balance and find in what way it's support our family and and as well doing it, in our family, we are both self-employed. So sometimes it has to be done because, there are real bills to pay. So nothing else behind us. So, yeah. And yes, as you say, boundaries. And I think that's the same even when for any parents, having support, even when we don't have a business, it's very important to seek for that support and not thinking that we have to do it all by yourself. And juggling all the different kind of jobs we have as parents by yourself, and just recognize that it's okay to ask for support. It's okay not to be, the perfect housewife, and it's okay to need a bit of childcare even when you're at home, even if the childcare is just for you to take a bath or being able to go somewhere by yourself or just KonMari your house. It's just, you might need that. That's it.
We talk about like dropping the ball. Like our house, especially recently, while I've been, I had like a few quite busy periods recently. In those periods, our house has just been a mess. It's just been really messy. Something has to give, and I didn't want it to be my work, and I didn't want it to be spending time with our daughter. So like a lot of the time, I think it can be again easy on Instagram to assume that everyone lives in like these perfect, pristine, KonMari'd houses. A lot of the time, most of our house would just be messy, and that is fine.
Yeah.
Has to give.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely the case here. Since we have started a boxes business, there are 6 days of the week when it's just boxes everywhere, paper everywhere, and nothing else is done. Just the boxes going out. Okay, so pardon?
You just have to try and be zen about it.
Yeah, be zen about it. We have a day of cleaning after that, but yeah. So I did ask every guest about a parenting quote. For most guests, obviously, it was a Montessori quote. So I did say that you can choose any parenting quote that was maybe your favorite, that one that talked to you. Yeah.
I did actually have a Montessori quote because it is just my favorite parenting quote, actually. I think of my is, but it's the Montessori one. I'm probably going to get it completely wrong, but it's where she says, the things that the child sees are not just remembered, they form a part of his soul. And I just think that is so beautiful. And I think it's really, kind of underlines everything that we've been talking about and everything that goes behind this kind of ethos of parenting and raising children, educating children. But it's not just, actually what we do with children really matters, and it really has a huge impact on them. And again, I think it's where Montessori was so ahead of her time. We know now that in the early years, especially, what children witness, their experiences have a huge neurological impact on how their brain develops and how they interact with others and how they grow up to perceive of themselves and perceive the world around them. And I think that this quote is just it's a really powerful reminder for me to try my best as a parent. I'm not always going to get it right. I mess up all the time, but to really try and give our daughter this beautiful childhood, and to try and do all we can to make
it refers to the first 6 years, right? When the child has such an absorbent mind, such a beautiful concept she has so well explained about those first 6 years being so important for the formation of the man and of the soul. And that's a beautiful quote. And I'm so impressed that everybody here so far has chosen a different quote. So it's going to be a great collection.
Surely someone is going to have chosen that quote already. But I'm glad we're
so keen to help parents to feel good, during that parenting journey. The early years were not easy for me, and taking care of myself was not really what I was thinking about. Not the early months for sure, and I became so much better. Obviously, my children are a bit more grown up, but I did stuff when they were little that I didn't really realize in the moment that were for my self-care. And I think there is all those talks nowadays about well-being and about mental health, and at the same time, it can be very, make us very anxious as parents because we don't find the time for that me time. But we can have that self-care when we have our young children. It's maybe changing the way we see self-care. So I'm very keen for you to just share a bit about your own self-care routine, just to inspire the parents on this course.
Definitely. And I think it's, as you say, self-care is so important. I actually think it's one of the most important things we can do as parents, because if you show up to your kids completely exhausted and frazzled, it's going to be so much harder to be patient, to be nurturing, to be respectful of them. Like, you're going to find things so much more triggering. So it is something, and I would say as well that I find self-care much easier now. As you were saying, my daughter is older and more independent, and I found it much harder when she was a tiny limpet who was attached to me permanently day and night. But I take self-care quite seriously. So I think the main thing is just being really open about my needs, and saying to my husband, for example, if I'm tired, look, I'm really tired, I need to go and have a bath with a book and just relax a bit. But I also try, because I don't have enormous amounts of free time just to myself, I try and work it into my daily life. So when I have a working day, my husband always mocks me, but I almost always, if I can make it work, try and have what I have come to term the working bath, where I just will get a book that I'm reading. So I'm always reading a few books for the work that I do. So I'll just go in the bath for half an hour, 45 minutes, and just read. And it means that I'm really focused on what I'm reading. I'm also kind of relaxing in the bath. But it feels like, I know it's such a cliche to say that having a bath is self-care, but for me it really is, because it means I'm not looking at emails on my phone, or no one's harassing me. I'm kind of just in my bubble. So that is kind of really important for me. Also making time to see friends. So I have a couple of really good friends from university who luckily both live in London. So what we try and do is every fortnight we go for dinner in Soho or something somewhere, and go and have a couple of drinks and eat some food and catch up. And that is so good at making me feel human, and not just a parent, and not just someone who just talks about parenting all day, but actually someone who has views on like the news or a book that they've read but isn't about parenting. So that's really nice. What else do? I try and listen to kind of little snippets of podcasts and things as well. So I have a couple of non-parenting podcasts that I listen to. I think, again, for me, I think it can be so easy when you're passionate about your work, and I'm sure you found this as well, to kind of, for everything you do, to be like about parenting or education, and for every book that I read to be about this. And I did have periods where all I was doing was reading blogs on parenting and books on parenting and podcasts on parenting, and it becomes really exhausting, and I think it takes some of the joy out of it. So what I try and be really intentional about doing now is actually reading for fun, or listening to like politics podcasts, things that make me feel a bit more like my old self, or maybe just myself, but a different part of myself. I think that for me is when I don't do that enough, I feel really anxious and miserable because I think I'm not honouring all of my different needs and parts of myself. What I'm not good at is I should really go on more dates and make more time for each other. I think we're both in the evening guilty of being tired and kind of just sitting there with our own books or watching something. And so I think we both feel very strongly that we need to make more kind of time for quality time with each other as well. But yeah, for me, I think reading, kind of listening to things which aren't parenting related, having a bath. I really also enjoy kind of organising and tidying our home. But again, that has been really sliding. So just slowly, I want to try and declutter more in our home. It's very cliched. All of these things are very cliched. I think the last thing I would say as well is, for me, self-care, yeah, it's about like doing nice things like reading and candlelit baths, but it's also really important to me as part of self-care to look after my mental health. So I have like recurrent anxiety that I've had for years now, and sometimes it's better than other times, and sometimes it can be really bad. And this year, one of my only real intention for this year, I don't really do goals, but has been, I really want to kind of just really look after my mental health. And I've seen a couple of people write about this and be like, self-care is not just about the nice bath and candles, but it's also, it can mean, if you're in debt, getting really serious about consolidating your debt and getting yourself out of it. It can be going to a doctor and saying, I need antidepressants. It can be about getting out of a toxic relationship. I think sometimes we see self-care is very airy-fairy, but I think, it really is about making sure that your deepest needs are being met, and, whether that is your mental health or whether that's making sure that you're feeling emotionally supported by the people around you, or, whatever it is. So, yeah, for me, I think the biggest thing that I keep a close eye on, I guess, is my mental health and my anxiety. And I want to make this the year that I actually find a good counsellor to talk to as well, and actually have some kind of counselling or therapy, because I think it's just such a great thing for people to do, and I feel like it would benefit me as well. So yeah, this is something I want to do more of.
Yeah, well, thank you for being so honest about all of that. And definitely, when we become a parent, it wake up some kind of deep emotions that we didn't have to deal with until we become parents, and all these things about being more conscious about what's going on and what we project on our children, and the anxiety or the stress or maybe some feeling of depression that has awakened, and all the reflection we can have about our own childhood, especially when we question the way we were raised, and all of that needs to be addressed. And it's totally okay indeed to take care of your mental health and to seek for proper support, and to say, well, I need help to process all of that. I need help to process who I'm becoming, that I'm a new mom or new dad, or that we are that couple now with a child. So we need support, and we need to address that, because that's going to help our children, obviously. We cannot just bury our head in the sand, and sometimes, yes, indeed, just a good bubble bath will not be enough. Great. Well, it was a real pleasure to chat with you. Bye.
Bye.